Okay, we are live, and welcome everybody to the third Strange Realities Conference preview. Hopefully, get some live listeners, some live viewers tonight. But this will also be on the podcast feed coming up at the beginning of the week. It is September 20th. I had to look at my computer to find out what day it is because I keep getting confused. But we are like rolling towards the beginning of the Strange Realities Conference coming up in Nashville October 14th through the 16th. And we have 4 more of the speakers that are going to be there at Strange Realities Conference. And 2 of which are doing remote, and 2 that will be on site at SAR Nashville. We have David Metcalfe.
How's it going?
All right. And Melody Blackthorne is with us.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Going very well. And we have Nathan Isaac. Nathan, can you... Uh-oh. We lost Nathan.
All right.
There he is. Yeah, we can hear you. Nathan Isaac, of course, from the Penny Royal podcast and from Somerset, Kentucky, the very famous Somerset, Kentucky. And last but definitely not least, we have Adam Gorightly. So welcome. Adam Gorightly has been like, man, it's you've been one of my first guests on this podcast, like way back. You were
back in the late 50s. Yeah.
Back in the late 50s, yeah. You're part of the reason why I wanted to do Conspiranormal. Been listening to your podcast, and I remember hearing you on Out There Radio back in, gosh, man, that was probably like 2004, 2005.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And listen to
back
to your
in the old days.
Yeah, listen to your podcast.
Podcasting goes, yeah.
Yeah, for real. Listen to your podcast for forever, and then Untamed Dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the name of it? Yeah. And now I got you coming to my conference, so I'm really happy to have you. But tonight, guys. Oh yeah. Looking forward to you to come to Nashville and hanging out with us. But tonight, what we're going to do for everybody is we're going to talk about what you guys are going to be talking about at the conference to give a preview. And we're also just, we could talk about any kind of other weird stuff we want to. But let's, because he's got to go at a certain point, let's talk to Mr. David Metcalfe here about what he is going to be presenting at Strange Realities 2022.
Yeah. I'm really inspired by Jeffrey Kripal's work on sort of mutants and mystics, the idea of the influence of fiction, the interaction of fiction with various phenomena, and also his ideas of the authors of the impossible, and this certain figures that have sort of shaped the culture in that. And with this UFO stuff that has really become almost obnoxiously popular at this point through the Tic Tacs and all the rest of it, it's just a constant sort of hammering on the sci-fi trope. The idea that the fiction that sort of captures these things best is sci-fi. And because that's always struck me as kind of weird. Just because if you look at most of the references that people go back to, it's quite often other fiction that's not necessarily sci-fi. Quite often it's horror. And when I started to look at sort of what is horror, like what are the elements of horror, what builds a horror story, what makes horror, it became more clear to me that was true. And I went back and I looked at some of Jeff's work on Whitley Strieber. And I realized that in his main essay on Whitley, which came out before Mutants and Mystics, I think it might have eventually ended up as a chapter in that book. He addresses the fact at the very beginning of it that he doesn't like, read, watch, or really engage with horror at all. And then he proceeds to write, sort of an essay on Whitley Strieber's place as an experiencer and as an author of the impossible in that. And it became, when I started looking at Strieber's career as a novelist prior to the Communion book and that, it became clear that there were certain trends in horror that were developing that actually find a place in Communion. So even outside of any truth claims of Communion, it actually fits as kind of a high point in where horror as a narrative genre, as a literature, was going in the 80s, tracing all the way back to like the beginning of sort of the Gothic movement in the late 1700s. So, I want to touch on that and kind of explore that, sort of reframe the phenomena through a horror narrative, which I think is actually really kind of the idea that sci-fi and that can be a sort of think piece to move forward with technology. It seems to me that horror is actually a really useful tool for sort of the psychological and socio-political and sociological kind of aspects of the phenomenon. So I'm gonna try to tease that out in a fun and interesting way.
Okay. Very, very interesting. I think that's going to be a really, really good one to talk about for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things, right? Like there's a lot of talk around alternate reality, right? And this idea that information operations within ufology and that may sort of operate as an alternate reality game. But I think that term itself is kind of a misnomer, because that's actually really specific. That's a really specific sort of modality that you build a game that interfaces with these kind of meta narratives and that. And it's not just like, so you just don't, alternate reality game everything. And what people are really talking about are narrative techniques. And those narrative techniques, for something like horror, where the whole purpose of it is to evoke an emotion, right? To evoke an experience in the reader. And it's quite different than, fiction, which, it can draw you in and it can do that. But horror is meant to literally trigger you into a heightened emotional state. And the best authors are able to do that with just words. The best filmmakers are able to do that with sight and sound. Tobe Hooper, when he was shooting Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a movie which, is famous because if you actually watch the movie, it's not what everybody says it is. It's not actually as bloody and gory and, sort of insane as people assume it is. But the reason that they assume that is because Hooper and the production team in that were so just beautifully crafted this sound and sight and visuals to create that in the audience. Diana Pasulka, with her work with American Cosmic, talks a lot about that, about her experience on the Conjuring set, and talking to the team behind the Conjuring franchise about how do you evoke these responses in the audience, and it goes down to just, sounds, tones. There's things that you can do to embed different sounds in the audio that will evoke, different frequencies in that. And so, I think Josh Cutchins, I think at the last one or the one before this, talked about it was The Buzz and the Beast, right? About the sounds that are associated with Bigfoot encounters and some of the encounters with different phenomena. And so that is what you experience when you go into a horror film, and that was one of the things that Diana's talked a lot about in terms of her work with media and exploring media. But what's interesting is I think that a lot of people draw away from horror because horror itself is kind of, plays with all these taboos, and, you either like horror or you don't, like a lot of people don't want to sit through a slasher film, but the tools that are in the slasher film that go to making it and our response to it is really similar to a lot of what experiencers will describe, and that, so it can become a tool for helping people to get over, these things or explore these states. So that's kind of where I'm going with things right now.
Yeah, that's excellent. To add to that, you have things like in a lot of horror movies, like these low drones and these type of things that are just kind of like added in.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Have you guys ever watched Gaspar Noé's Irreversible or any of
Mm-mm.
Gaspar Noé's films?
Mm-mm.
He uses they're really, really violent films, but they're he got a degree in philosophy at the Sorbonne, and then and then got a film degree, right? So all of his films are meant to be these sort of existential horrors, and so Irreversible, the camera is on a mount and spins the entire time. So the entire narrative is told through this sort of gyroscopic motion. And then he uses infrasound and a specific frequency. He talks about it in some of his interviews to make people have a sense of being on edge the entire time. And some people react and then will get nauseous, have nausea, associated with it. So part of the experience is the actual physical terror that's enacted upon the audience while watching the film.
Yeah, that actually that was an interesting thing that I didn't realize. That Wes Craven's first movie, Last House on the Left, it's you can't watch it twice. I mean, like if you watch it twice, like it's kind of that's that's a problematic thing. Just because it's so just rawly violent and offensive, really. And I saw it when I was in college, and I was like, I'll never see this movie again. And then seeing interviews with him as I was doing research for this thing, he talks about how he didn't intend people to see it again. His whole intention with that movie was to show people what was going on in Vietnam. And he said that the irony of it was that critics, the social commentary of how terrible this movie was and how it was, it was going to ruin society and that. And what he said was that was happening every day over in Vietnam. And no one said anything about it. That was fine. That was socially sanctioned. I made a fiction that showed people the reality of what this would be if it came home. And the social, the people, the powers that be freaked out. And they couldn't handle seeing what was, William S. Burroughs, the naked lunch, right? Like the thing that they were eating. And I thought that was really interesting, the idea that you would make a movie that would only be seen once, which, that happens in like, art films and that, like someone maybe, this will only be seen once or whatever. But I think Crispin Glover's kind of played with that with some of his stuff where it's only seen when he shows it kind of thing, but for an exploitation film that was kind of, the producers made it to make money. For the director to have that intention of it being just so visual, like just viciously in your face with its subject matter, that most people would only see it once, and he was fine with that. That was the purpose. I thought that was really an interesting use of, sort of entertainment means, and that also made me think about communion differently. Is because the idea of Whitley's place in literature at the time, because they were trying to make horror a literature in the late 70s, well, starting with the late 60s and that, but the idea of horror novels and then legitimate horror novels, that were bridging into literary novels, right? Like accepted establishment stuff. Whitley was within that circle of people that were sort of working on that. And so when Communion comes out, it just destroys his career as a fiction writer. And it was interesting because Stephen King, in an interview in the early 80s, sitting with Peter Straub, who was within that circle, and George Romero, and Ira, I forget his name, but the guy who wrote Rosemary's Baby, and they were being interviewed on a talk show. And Stephen King said, they were asking about if they believed in this stuff or not. And Stephen King was like, well, yeah, I do. I definitely believe in it. And Peter Straub was saying he believed in ghost encounters and that. And then the question was brought up of, would you want to see a UFO? And Stephen King was like, yeah, that, I don't care about the ghosts and the psychic stuff. Like that's fine, but I want to see UFO. I want the UFO encounter. And he said, but if I did, I would never say it, because that's a game killer for anybody in our industry as a horror author or a fiction writer, to say that you encountered one of these things, because it would just be, oh, it's just what the horror, the horror guy's saying. And so it was really interesting that Strieber was within this circle, and then he becomes that guy, the guy who does it. But at the same time, the way that reality in that was being interwoven with the fictions, like Peter Straub's got the Ghost Story, which is kind of his big novel that was the break for him. That has mentions of, you know, seeing Vincent Price movies and Carrie, and that it interweaves with reality at the time. And so, you know, that becomes just really hyper pronounced in Strieber's work, which I think is just interesting. And again, I don't think it's an either or situation of hoax or not hoax. I think that this is sort of par for the course in these things.
Yeah, that was the thing, was that some of Strieber's work that wasn't taken seriously because it was saying that he was a horror fiction writer already, and that he could have just pulled this out of his other books and just like rearranged it and made it seem like a true story. That was a criticism at the time. That was big.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can to look at the actual like literary criticism in that, because it's different from the, you know, the paranormal criticism, right, or the from that end, from the weird end, right? Like the literary critics don't quite know where to place that, but you know, in the history of horror, there's, well, actually in just literature, it's called factional, and they lot him in with the Amityville Horror, right? Like he's put in that category of being, could be true, could not be true. Maybe there's something at the base of it, but you know, like how much is layered on top of that. And I thought that was interesting because you know, I don't know, it was weird to find him in that place of being critiqued. And if you look at his books, were being recommended for high school students and junior high students the year before Union was published. You know, and so it's really interesting. And I've met and spent time with him too. So just being able to sort of reflect on that, this aspect of his career.
Right. I think that's going to be a fascinating presentation about that. Strieber's he's an interesting person, that's for sure. I can remember going to a conference here in Nashville with him there, and I didn't really get to even talk to him. I just kind of felt intimidated by the guy, to be completely honest with you.
He has a presence. He's super nice.
Yeah, don't quite know why, but that's kind of how it went. Yeah,
he's a nice guy. You got to get it, like when he reads poetry and stuff. I love his voice. He's got such a great voice.
Right. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how you deal with that, or how anybody really in the paranormal field deals with something about Strieber.
Well, you know, I mean, so this somewhat came out of looking at. I have a piece I did on Phantom Hitchhikers. There's a really good book that came out on the Phantom Hitchhiker phenomena, and in folkloristics, there are tools that you can use to differentiate elements of a folktale from someone's actual experience. So when you're out collecting stories in a community, fact and fiction are going to blend, and history is going to blend in, and it's going to be this weird sort of weave and everything. And there's actual tools to tease out what are the factual elements, what are the sort of narrative elements that get added onto that. And with Phantom Hitchhikers, it's a really good example because the phenomena of someone driving and encountering something out there is usually not very narrative. It's usually, you know, you see an orb, you see a thing. It's a lot more numinous, and there's no clear like denouement, like it doesn't end anywhere. It's just you had this experience and that's it. But the Phantom Hitchhiker as a narrative story is that you picked up someone that then had an address that then, you know, and it gets into that kind of urban legend aspect of it. And then why was that person? And there's a local story as to why. But, you know, up by where I grew up, Resurrection Mary. And so the idea was that Resurrection Mary was coming back from a ball, and walking, and she got hit. And now, you know, she's on the side of the road waiting for people to come and pick her up. and take her back to the cemetery. And so there's a narrative there. And the cemetery bars for a while at Resurrection Cemetery actually had been oddly bent, and it looked like they'd been melted and pulled apart. And then they fixed that so that people weren't driving, because Archer Avenue, where that is really dark and it's kind of a dangerous highway area. But so there's these narrative elements to it, which and that exists across the spectrum. And so I think it's interesting to see that interplay in other narratives, because horror actually allows you to sort of explore those aspects of these things.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, David. That's looking forward to that. And Nathan, let's talk about what you're going to talk about.
But before I jump into that,
Sure.
You've got to talk to Delaney Bowers, man, about the whole folklore and the structure of everything, because she's been studying some of that stuff, and it's totally fucking fascinating, So, exactly the same stuff, especially when she hears me spouting all my bullshit. And then she's like, this matches exactly this folk theory, Nathan, and it's exactly how a ghost story is told.
But
so,
I don't know if you can see it, but with this 5-person layout here, we've got Delaney just like perfectly in between you and Gorightly. So there's
right there.
There she is. Yeah. I was gonna she's gonna come on next week and do this with us. So
she's great. She really is. I mean, she's a PhD folklorist, so it's like, and she's always, I think she's always thought that people thought this stuff was boring, but it's like now there's like bandwidth in the paranormal community for folklore again, I think, and where it wasn't there before, but it's like another layer that we need to be exploring that I think has been lacking,
Did I tell you my weird coincidence with Delaney? That I told you this?
No.
So I worked with this guy that he's like a wrestler, like an amateur wrestler, I guess you could call. And when I had her on, she talked about this study that she did about amateur wrestlers around the South and everything like that. And I worked with him and his wife, and his wife looked at me and says, like, you just had on somebody that that interviewed him. And I'm like, really? Who? And then it dawned on me that it was Delaney. So she interviewed a coworker of mine and then got interviewed on my show.
Oh,
it was an interesting coincidence.
That's really fascinating.
Thought,
yeah, that's how she ended up down here, because we have all these like rural wrestling leagues in down the Somerset area, and it's like, holy shit, and she came down here to study like how they create their identities in these fictional narratives that play into their lives and as blue collar human beings, So it's cool. I'm excited to see what she's going to talk about. I wonder.
Me too.
All right, so the thing I'm going to talk about is the title for it is Wrong Numbers, Channeling, Information Theory, and the Trickster. Right. So I've been, obviously I sound like a broken record with the whole second order cybernetics shit, but it's definitely like, something that always sort of informs what I'm looking at. But Claude, Shannon, and information theory, and just this idea that the emergence of communication technology parallels the rise of mediumship, and spirituality, and that every step along the way, as we progressed in new types of communications, there were new entities and new intelligences that were talking to people, right? And often they were leading them on these crazy adventures and journeys and sort of, messing with everybody. And so I'm basically tracing the history of that and looking at, the beginning of, the telegraph all the way through to Nikola Tesla and Marconi building their spirit phones and receiving, contacts from what they thought at the time was possibly Mars, then Marconi says, actually, I think this is just 100 miles above the Earth, and so all of the strange communications that they were receiving, into the 1900s, and sort of the connection between also the spirit boards, Ouija boards, and early UFO contacts, right? With like George Hunt Williamson and George Adamski and all that stuff. So Preston Dennett has quite a bit of research that he's kind of put together that I pulled some of those UFO stories from. Obviously, the Gulf Breeze 6, which is a crazy story, where these guys are led astray by contacts with a UFO through a Ouija board, and also just satellite technology. There's just a lot of stuff that I came across in terms of like the Telstar 1, which was the first broadcast of like a live actual video broadcast, and it included John F. Kennedy giving a speech, right? And it was heard by a large number of the human populace. And there was some research that we had done regarding schizophrenia and hearing voices and encountering, hallucinations. That JFK was around the world. JFK was the number one, outside of the U.S. even. That people that had schizophrenia were encountering, right? And I wondered if it was because of some of this early, like the first broadcast, live human broadcast was JFK, right? And somehow that had saturated everybody. But so I get into some of that stuff, but ultimately it's just these stories of how there are these trickster intelligences, phone calls from the dead. Also, once the phone is invented, people start to. There's even phone clairvoyance. That are actually advertising to people that they can talk to the dead through the phones, right? And so through all of it, people are thinking that they're talking to their dead family members or talking to the Space Brothers, or that these things are, even the channeled literature, of Ra, of Seth, of all these things. Shit, the 12 Steps program, was received through channeled communications, right?
Right.
And so it's always like, can you trust any of these communications, right? And when you look at these types of communications through Claude Shannon's information theory, you have to start asking questions about novelty, right? And then also the security of the channel, right? Can you have secure communications with the other world, right? Or are those communications always subject to being hacked and hijacked by various intelligences, right? And you look at like the Dawdleton messages, where the guy's receiving the messages from the computer, that BBC One, and he thinks he's talking to a guy in the 1600s, and then 2109 jumps into the thing. It's like, you can't trust that guy. You can only trust us. Then 2105 jumps in. And so those types of things fascinate me because in terms of information theory, it's like, there's a weird parallel between where we are technologically and how we're able, what kinds of information, what kinds of channels we're opening, right, to these entities. And then the final thing I get into is the idea of like the Umwelt, and that all of these technologies are allowing us to expand our sort of sphere of, like a tick is blind and it only really knows, it can only detect blood, and I think there's a certain type of acid, right? And it's like its entire universe is that and nothing outside of it, right? But then humans, in this way that we've built technology and created new sensors, these sensors have increased our sort of Umwelt, right? So that we can now detect these intelligences and they can detect us, right? And maybe they've always been able to detect us. But just looking at the history of communication theory, the history of mediumship and spirit and otherworldly communication, and how those things parallel, and sort of where we're headed in terms of those technologies. And I'm going to demo some of the stuff that we've been working on with ChannelBot that Darian West, my research partner, developed, that uses randomness to channel messages, but pairing that with Midjourney's bot, so that whenever we channel a message, that message is then run through that to create an AI image, right? So it's sort of like early ITC kind of stuff with like the static on the television, or looking at the television to see images. Can the AI take a sort of this channeled message and then convert it into a visual element that we can also use to interpret or communicate? So
How do you feel about the results that you're getting with that? Do you think the pictures are interesting in terms of communication, or pretty?
We only started doing it. It depends on the text. Because you have to actually supply a text for it to channel from. And so the first things that we were doing were some of the Gaterma FBI file stuff. But it's interesting because it still generates, it will.
Yeah.
What it's doing, it's selecting for words in the text. It converts the text, any type of text that you want to upload, into an array, right, of comma separated values. And then you set your Shannon threshold, and then when the entropy drops and things become more certain locally, right? And the randomness is supplied by weather data, right, through random.org. So it's pseudo randomness, it's not like exactly true randomness, but it'll select for words from a text. We've done the Book of Law from Crowley. I think tailoring the text a little bit to what you're going to be setting your intention to, right? If it was something that was alchemical, or it just might be more germane. But it is really strange. Someone suggested to me too using Dara Mason's sigil engine to take the intentions, create a sigil, and then run the sigil through Midjourney, which has provided the craziest results to see how it interprets that sigil into a fully formed image. So, but I mean, this is the first, and only in the last like 3 weeks that we really started getting into this. And I was like, man, I really want to include this sort of at the end of the presentation to look at some of the images that were produced. So I digress.
Looks like we lost Gorightly. I was going to ask, you mentioned ITC. I was actually going to ask you about that, about whether you're going to hit the kind of like the constant interactive stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to go into all that. I'm not deeply. Again, I'm just going to kind of cover the history of it. But yeah,
right.
I mean, when you listen to
there's a lot to cover. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, I'm not going to do the thing this year where I put this gigantically detailed presentation behind me where you can't read what it is. I'm gonna go for just the general things. So
well, the beauty of that, Nathan, is that people can go back and they can watch that again and again, so they have time to read all that in the background if they want to.
True.
So
that's true.
That's kind of the beauty of it.
I felt like I overloaded things last year, but anyway, it's going to be cool. I think Darian's going to be down there with me. I don't know if we can actually demo it on screen. I don't know, if we can do that and then switch to that or not. But
did you look at Paul Benowitz at all, communicating through his computer?
I didn't do any of that. Oh, Adam, that's good too.
Apparently, I was reading some stuff the other day, and he was using text ASCII to communicate with the aliens, or whatever he was thought he was communicating to.
Right. And according to what Doty says that they were the ones that were doing that, right? They hacked his computer.
Well, yeah, there's different rumors of how he got the computer and who fed him the information.
But I mean, there's no like with Benowitz
or
having those
disinformation, as the case may be.
yeah. I mean, Benowitz was having those communications, and we've got a guy in England that was having communications through a BBC One with a 16th century author or guy, you know. So it's like, why why say that guy's not having an experience, but this guy is, you know?
Yeah, I've never heard of that one, Nathan. I never heard of that at all.
The Dawdleston messages.
Yeah.
Oh, dude,
yeah.
you got to read The Vertical Plane. It's
Okay.
Ken Webster.
that's a
was
good
the
one.
author. It's fucking great, dude. And again, I mean, all these things are subject to hoaxing, right? I mean, you know,
Sure.
who knows with any of it if that it's not being hoaxed, but there were other people that were using the BBC One, right? That also reported communications with other times and entities, right? So then you got to wonder if that if there was a circuit, right, a particular part in the BBC One that allowed it to be open to these types of communications.
Was this inspired somewhat by some of the stuff that you've been looking at in Pennyroyal, like in the first season where you talked about some of the people in the mental institution that said that they were talking to intelligences and said that Dan had some interaction with those people?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the whole like story of the nine, right?
Right.
As always,
Yeah.
like there was a weird correlation between like the patients there and then the story of the nine. But then you get into the research with like the fact that Andrea Puharich is involved with the nine, right? And he invents a hearing aid, a quartz hearing aid that allows you to beam voices into people's ears. Right. So he's looking at technology that will allow you to put, you know, sounds into people. And then the group that he's working with are all channeling and hearing voices from a group of entities orbiting the Earth, right? In a 13,000-year-old satellite. You know, it's the same sort of Black Knight satellite story. And then Uri Geller gets into his story of spectra, right?
Hey Nathan, with the Puharich stuff, have you read the post Puharich 9 material?
No.
It's interesting because everything that you're saying like is accurate in parts. I guess it's accurate like sort of factually, but the 9 thing is interesting. You should definitely read Phyllis Schlemmer, I think is her name, the person who was actually channeling the 9 for kind of the late. Read her works. John Whitmore, who's a famous sort of he developed the whole idea of like leadership movement in corporate America and that. But take a look at that stuff because it really reframes kind of the importance of that in the sense that and also Greta Woodruff. Definitely take a look at Greta Woodruff's material because she was one of Puharich's space kids. She just happened to be at the time middle age, I think, or older. But she was an establishment figure that was, you know, I forget. She was, I think she had an executive coach. It was like executive, you know, when like you hire a firm to basically bring in a CEO or a COO, she was kind of like a headhunter. And she started channeling not the 9, but another group. And her writings, though, she actually writes about her time at Puharich's Lab 9. And it gives a whole different sense for all of that. It was kind of a ramshackle mess.
Really?
Yeah, I mean the Lynn Pickett stuff, it's all really blown way out of proportion. And like if you read like what Puharich was actually like, kind of, it was real basement stuff, basement tech. Like we've got a Faraday cage and let's rock this. I mean, one of like a lot of the tests for the 9 in that were done in his bedroom because that was the biggest room and that's where they had the Faraday cage. And I don't mean that in any kind of like weird kinky way.
Yeah.
Literally, it was just like, hey, we've got the Faraday cage in the bedroom, so we'll be down here. You go up there and like sit and channel in the Faraday cage.
That's crazy.
So, yeah, definitely. Like, if you're gonna do Puharich, read around the mythology of Puharich.
Yeah.
Read read beyond the supposed MK Ultra mind handler kind of guy, and like actually because it's more charming, I guess, and it's more fumbly and it's more real, and more human, you know, than kind of the myth of Puharich as the sort of, you know, whatever. But
Yeah.
So it's not an overarching conspiratorial plot. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it could
David?
be, you could work it in, but it's going to be more like Homeward Bound or something. It's
Yeah.
be like
It's-
a Disney like animal movie, you know.
So it's not going to get that great Skywatch TV headline.
It might, you know. I mean, I'm sure Skywatch could do something with a Faraday cage in a bedroom. You know, I'm sure that they could build a narrative around that. The other interesting thing too is his building in New York actually got turned into like a community center or something. And when they sold it, the people like ended up just dumping all the stuff and sealing up like a lot of the stuff in the basement. Because they were like, this was a Satanist house and it was evil, and like this, that book.
Yeah, there's the Stargate conspiracy. Yeah, man. Yeah.
I never trust a Luciferian who says that there's a Luciferian conspiracy. That seems weird to me.
Right.
Like someone who's like heavily invested in the occult and is like, there's an occult conspiracy. Like, really?
There's a crazy story too where like Puharich ends up in Mexico with what's her name with L&L Research, Carla Ruckert.
Yeah.
You know, who did all the raw stuff, and then they end up in Louisville, Kentucky, right? And they write a bunch of books about contacting UFOs, but they end up being hired to work. There was a huge horror movie, not huge, but there was a horror movie scene in Louisville, Kentucky in the 1970s, and they hired Carla and the other guy, I forget his name right now, but to basically create this scene of possession, like demonic possession, and it's too hokey, so they end up hiring what's his name from the Church of Set. My brain stopped working. Aquino, yeah. So they bring him into Louisville at the same time with the L&L Research people that were channeling Ra, and they like work on the set together. And so there are these memoirs that have the description of the conflict between them and Aquino on set as he tries to.
Was this a William Girdler movie? That was the big. He was the big horror film director from Louisville, Kentucky.
Might have been. I've got the. It's from Carla. It's her journals about that experience. Yeah. But I thought that was funny just to see it go from Puharich to L&L to Louisville, and then Aquino sort of pops up and gets involved, you know, in terms of, you know, psychological warfare.
All right. Well, I guess Melody, we'll talk about what you're going to talk about at the Strange Realities.
Okay, sure. First of all, I'm really glad to be a part of this and honored to participate. What I'm going to be exploring with my thank you. What I'm going to be exploring with my presentation is taking a look at the Bell Witch haunting through what I believe is a completely different lens. You know, so much of the focus on that particular story, the folklore behind it, it centers around your typical haunting, and this happened and this happened, and we think this is why it happened. If you really take a look at society at that time in that part of the country, we're talking northern middle Tennessee, very close to Kentucky, very close to Mammoth Cave, very close to what, you know, would eventually be Hopkinsville. And we know what happened there in the 50s. You're talking about an area of the country where lots of unusual, unexplained things have happened. So I've been studying this particular legend and basically looking at everything I could get my hands on for probably half of my life. And what I finally began to realize is if you really broaden the examination of what happened to John Bell and his family, and you take it to the greater community, there were very many things that happened. And I honestly believe that there are 3 different explanations for what occurred during that time. One may have been a poltergeist. I believe that there was some sort of cryptid activity that was going on. You had stories of, people were seeing a donkey that had the head of a rabbit. They were seeing strange ethereal women in the woods, several different types of creatures. They alluded to large cats. There's one story where they talk about a giant fish that everyone was at the river on a Sunday afternoon, and they're all fishing and having lunch, and all of a sudden here comes this giant fish right down the middle of the stream, and the fish just happened to steal the fishing rod of Betsy Bell's then fiance. And the story goes that Betsy then decided, well, I can't marry him. And so she broke up with him and ended up marrying her school teacher. But that's another story for another day. There was a lot of activity that was happening there. And the way it's passed down through folklore, through the community, I really want to take a look at the stories that were being told. And also, is it possible that we're talking about things like egregores and groupthink? Where were the origins of this, and what were the external influences that were at play? If you look at 1819, 1820s Tennessee and Kentucky, you had the onset of the spiritualist movement, the Methodist revival movement. People were gathering near places that were seen to be, these places were actually more glorified forts. They really weren't towns and cities yet. A lot of it was still very frontier. So you had many people gathering in different areas, raising energy, raising sand, as they say. And then all of a sudden you have this very famous quote unquote poltergeist haunting, whatever it was, occurring in the same place. So part of my frustration with the Bell Witch story and the Bell Witch legend is I feel like we've only explored it one-dimensionally. And what I've been working on is looking at it with, more of a three-dimensional focus and taking the different pieces and hopefully connecting them together to maybe start taking a look at historical hauntings and really examining them through a different lens as to what could have really been going on.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, put it in the context of the time and the era and everything, because most of the time the historical context isn't covered as well as it probably should be. I'm curious if you're going into any of the any of the Masonic
I think what
stuff.
happens too is
well, go ahead. I think there was a lag. There was a lag, I think.
Yeah, I think you'll have to excuse me. My internet. I'm on hotel internet. We recently moved to Asheville, and we're waiting on our apartment to be ready. So I'm at the mercy of extended stay. So, hopefully it's not cutting out too bad. Yeah, what I think happens is when like the Bell Witch legend. If you're a kid that grew up in Tennessee or in Kentucky, we all heard it. We knew what it was. We knew the story of Betsy Bell. They were scratched in the middle of the night. They had their hair pulled. I mean, if you grew up in Tennessee, you're pretty much raised on it. But what inspired me was when I would, read a book about it or watch something on TV. They're basically just retelling the folklore, right? They're just retelling what's been handed down since all this happened back in 1820. And I really wanted somebody to dig in and explore the why behind it and look at all the external factors and the internal factors that could have been influencing what was happening. And so I finally just decided, okay, well, you want someone to just do it yourself. So as kind of an amateur historian, what I found in my research was that there were so many things going on at the time. And it's really interesting if you take a look at the different things that have happened throughout history. If you start in the 1820s, you can almost do a timeline that leads straight to, the 1950s and the Hopkinsville Goblins, and then take that forward to the 70s, and you can almost get to Mothman if you really sit down and look at it, and it just really inspires you to wonder what could be happening in that particular part of the country that inspires all of this activity. It's just amazing the amount of activity that starts right there on the Tennessee-Kentucky line and travels all the way to West Virginia through north and eastern Kentucky. It's Nathan. I mean, he's done so much of that, and I think I'm glad that people are actually finally taking a look at this and wondering, where does it come from? I mean, is it the folklore and legends that's been handed down from the Scottish and Irish that originally settled the area? It's really been an interesting journey, and I feel like I've just started it, and I'm really interested in continuing that journey and finding out even more.
Sounds like a good basis for a book, maybe.
Well, actually, that's what I'm working on.
Yeah,
moving kind of put it on hold. I've got a tentative title, The Bell Witch is an Alien and Other Weird Shit, that I'm working with. But yeah, I grew up in Tennessee. Have family. Nathan may be familiar with this area of Kentucky. I have family in a place, Owen County, Kentucky, which is extremely northern. Yes, he's shaking his head. He knows what I'm talking about. Late 70s, early 80s, Owen County, Kentucky was about as rural as you could get. There wasn't a lot there. And I can remember my grandfather had a place on top of a ridge, and he had several hundred acres. And there were a lot of old abandoned houses, and that was kind of what we did when we were kids, is we would sneak off and start exploring these old houses. And when I say old houses, I mean houses that were probably, over 100 years old. It's a place where you can go for a walk in the woods, and you can happen upon a cemetery that has graves from, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So really encouraged by the interest that in general people are showing for the legends and tales of that particular area of the country. So that's what my book is going to focus on, as I'm putting together. The Bell Witch is kind of the star of the book, but I'm also looking at different legends and different happenings, focusing on Tennessee, Kentucky, and now since I'm here, Western North Carolina.
Perfect. Yeah. The Red River area, Adams, Tennessee. Now, I don't know really what came first, but whenever I've gone up there a couple of times, it does have a weird feeling to it. First time that I went up there, I didn't even go close to the Bell Witch, any of the Bell Witch stuff. And it just felt really, really odd to me. So I don't know if you get the same feeling when you're there or close to that area, but I definitely get the feeling that it is kind of a weird place.
Yeah, I think it's an area of country. There's some magic to the land. It's one of the best ways I've been able to describe it. There is a inherent history, and I'm not sure if it's from the indigenous people who once occupied that area. There is an inherent magic to the land. I mean, you can feel it here. One of the things that my husband and I do, we spend a lot of time hiking. There's the mountains around here. You can, it's not impossible to find a trail and literally be by yourself for a couple of hours, up in these mountains, and you really feel that inherent, beingness, is, for want of a better word. It's just a different sort of feeling that you get. And I sourced down a couple of things that I think it is. I think you could attribute it to, the group think, or the idea of egregores, thought forms and things that we, 10 people, 20 people thinking the same thing over a period of time, takes that energy and creates that that thing almost from whole cloth. But I definitely agree with you. Red River is one of those, that area around Adams is one of those areas that you just almost feel, you almost feel it before you realize you're there.
Absolutely. All right, that sounds very, very interesting. And I should say too, when everybody is going to be speaking as well, guys. David and Melody, you guys are both on Saturday. You guys are going to be doing remote presentations, which I've got those grouped.
Yes.
Oh, no, sorry, Sunday the 16th. Melody, you're at 1:30 to 2:30. That's Central Time, and David, you're at 2:30 to 3:40. That's also Central Time. So calculate accordingly. And then Nathan, you're Saturday night again, 6:30 to 7:30. And Gorightly follows you. It's 7:40 to 8:40. So you're Gorightly's opening act.
That's gonna be so cool, man. I mean,
yeah.
I'm kind of bummed I couldn't come. Really, I had planned on being there in person, and as will happen when one moves, we moved here in May, and the housing situation being it is, we were informed that we had gotten an apartment and we could move in on October 13th. So kind of put a little wrench in my plans. So I appreciate you guys accommodating the stream.
Yeah, no problem. So we're looking forward to that, Melody. I think it's going to be great. Looking forward to see what you have, and what you're going to be talking about, strange realities. And that leaves us with Mr. Gorightly and what he's going to be talking about.
I'm supposed to be talking about something?
Yeah. Are you going to get up there and do like a song and dance act or something?
Yeah. Well, I told you about Dolly Parton. I'm working on that. So
yeah.
See how that
Okay.
plays out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a full stage for you up there. So if you can, bands rehearse there all the time. So if you can pull Dolly in to do a duet with, are you going to like reenact The Gambler or something? I mean, what's going?
That's plan A. If that falls through, I'm not sure. I'm marveling at Nathan's mixing board there now. That's awesome. I want to go record some music there.
Come here, man. You've got to come up here and hang out. And
I will. I was talking to my wife about visiting you because he welcomed me a while back. So we'll do that sometime.
Please, yes.
Okay, so what I'll be talking about. Originally, I was thinking of doing something called Kooks I Have Known and Loved, about different people I've written about. Carrie Thornley, Tal Levesque is one, Manson, kind of talking about how these different figures have kind of influenced culture or different subcultures, fringe culture, And then, but I decided to go with a James Shelby Downard presentation because recently, the last couple of years, number one, I've been working on that unpublished Downard book that Adam is probably aware of. I've been working on it for like 5 or 6 years, and I'm getting real close. And my plan was to have it done before the conference, but I'm not sure that's going to happen right now. But getting close to being ready to get published. So going through this process, the last couple of years, I've been networking with other people. One of them is Nathan, who's done a deep dive into James Shelby Downard, as well as Richard Spence, who's penned the afterword for this book, and another guy named Reed Marcus. In the last couple of years, I say these guys have probably done a lot of the work chasing down these different leads about Downard, and we've learned much more, some crazy mind-blowing stuff. I know Nathan went into it, was like, did this guy even really exist? Was he a composite character made up by these other characters like Adam Parfrey and Bill Grimstead and Michael Hoffman. Well, he does exist. I think Nathan can agree on that. But what we've learned is since then is pretty mind-blowing to kind of piece in his strange history where there was a lot of blanks. There still is a huge blank area from, what is it, the 60s and from the 60s and 70s, or early 70s at least. But so the presentation will be called Searching for Dr. Downard. That's all I'm going to tell you right now.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, that's the doctor reference is awesome.
Because he was a doctor, believe it or not. Kind of, sort of. Yeah. There's some crazy shit that's come across the pike here in the last year or so. It's like, whoa, yeah, he was a real guy. And a lot of people thought that, the legend of Downard, and you guys might be aware of it, that he was supposedly at one point traveling across the country in his Airstream trailer, the Freemasons hot on his tail. He was looking, had a Colt 45 by his side and chasing down these different conspiracies and Fortean anomalies. And a lot of people thought, it's a bit too much to believe, but even his background is even wilder than the legends that we heard about in the past. So be there. Or be square on what Saturday at what time?
Saturday at, we pull it back up, 7:40 8:40 Central Time. I say that because we're going to have a substantial streaming audience too, and they could be just about anywhere.
Oh, that's a good time for me to get lubricated on a couple beers. So yeah.
There you go. So there's going to be some new information imparted to us at Strange Realities Conference.
It should be new. I think Nathan has probably seen a lot of this stuff. We just touched back together again after not communicating for several months, and I'm glad he shared a little nugget with me. I won't put it in the presentation. What your the reference to Saturn, I was going to touch on that, but now I know that's probably bullshit. But yeah, it's it's an ongoing process. Looking at Downard and putting together his history. Maybe originally I was going to suggest this to Nathan and maybe Richard Spence, that we get together and put all this material into a book somewhere down the line. We're still learning a lot more. So anyway, yeah, that's what the presentation is going to be about.
So there's a lot more about Downard to be known. That's interesting.
And there's still that lost decade, man, from like 65 to 75, it's like, if you could just pin down what happened right there,
Well, yeah, he was probably well, we'll talk about that at the event. Gotcha.
Well, I mean, for everybody, I think that's worth the price of admission alone, is finding out this information. I mean, Gorightly, you've done a lot of research on Downard over the years. That's for sure. So the book you talk about, that's more kind of like, that's the continuation of his autobiography.
Well, kind of, sort of. It was laid on me. It's been a few years now. 2015, I got a hold of this unpublished manuscript, which was like, roughly 650 pages, and it's like two different. I describe it in the foreword to the book. It's like 2 or 3 different manuscripts and doubled together, and there's like unfinished chapters, and so it was a big challenge or a lot of work to kind of edit this into something digestible, and so that's what I've been working on the last few years, along with a bunch of other projects, film projects, and different books I've published. So it's one of those things that kind of gets put back on. It's on the back burner, for a couple of years, and then I circle around to it, and I'm finally to the point where it's almost finished. Right now, it's just a matter of I'm self-publishing this, and it's the first self-published thing I've done where I'm doing the layout and everything, and so there's always a lot of hiccups. It's a learning curve for me putting this all together. So the basic guts of the book is done. It's just finishing the layout and getting it published. Now that'll probably take a month or two.
Does it pick Carnival's of Life and Death leaves off, or is it just a little bit more?
Oh well, it's partially autobiographical, but then it isn't. Some of the chapters this go into is different theories and that type of thing. So it's a mix of this, the ancient Egyptian history he gets into, mystery religions. A lot of that goes on and on. But then there's different biographical stuff that kind of picks up after that, the Carnivals of Life and Death. But it's not, it's just different scenes. He's in Mexico for a while where he has a battle with Leon Trotsky, and I don't know, Nathan might have seen some of this stuff. So it's a patchwork. That's what I was saying. When I got it, it looked like 2 or 3 different manuscripts, and so, but it all overlaps. It all ties into essential themes and theories, about the 33rd degree latitude and the atomic bomb explosion at the Trinity site, and how this was all part of this alchemical ritual, magical working type situation. So it's not purely autobiographical. I would say maybe a third of it is, and it kind of picks up where the Carnivals of Life and Death left off.
So did he claim that he killed Trotsky? Or does he just have a
inadvertently? It appears, yes. The history tells us that Trotsky was somebody took a hatchet and whacked him, gave him 50 whacks.
It was an ice pick, wasn't it?
Yeah, somebody. He had a mole in like his communist cell that assassinated him.
A Stalinist.
Downard tells a whole different story.
We get the true story, is what you're saying. That's the
Downard's. Maybe you might have a piece of the true story with Downard. It's always this thing. Well, claims he met this person at this certain time, but then you trace some of the history. Some of it kind of jibes with where these people were, but did he confabulate certain things? FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, shows up several times in his works, but there's. Nathan came across an interesting photograph that kind of, lends some credence to maybe he was in New Orleans in the 30s at the same time of FDR. Whether they actually interacted or not is another story.
The whole other thing.
He's like this Walter Mitty type character that, claims he knew all these people and did all these different things, and some of it kind of sort of adds up to a certain extent, but a lot of it doesn't.
Well, David's going to have to go. We're going to probably end here in just the next few minutes anyway. But David, if you could tell everybody where they can find you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, David B. Metcalfe.wordpress.com. It's my blog. I'm on Twitter and all the rest of those things. I will be hosting an art exhibit in Athens.
Oh, yeah.
So October 9th, we're having our opening reception. It's going to be at the Athens Clarke County Library. Greg Bishop will be there, talking about UFOs and all that good stuff. It's folk and outsider art focused on UFOs, so it should be pretty interesting. Mostly regional, some from outside the region, but yeah, it should be a good little event, and that'll be going until November 22nd. So if anybody ends up in Athens, Athens Clarke County Library will be hosting that exhibit. Adam, I'm excited to hear your talk on this. I actually Downard was my high school yearbook quote, so it was some king kill that I put in there. And I look back on that now, and I'm like, oh wow, that was making a statement for, like, 97 high school yearbook. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the deep history here of Downard beyond the known facts. But
what was the quote? What was the quote? What was the quote?
It was the witch's cauldron one. That the son of the United States is some sorcerer or something or other, witch's cauldron.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good. It's very into the X-Files. It was that period in the 90s. So X-Files and apocalypse culture, as one does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Metcalfe.
Yeah, thank you. Take care, everybody.
We'll talk to you soon. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here and doing this tonight. I think we're going to probably run this to a close. We will start with Nathan. And actually, my question for you before you talk about where to find you and all that, is there going to be a third season of Pennyroyal? Are you thinking about it?
No, for sure. There's going to be 2 more seasons.
2 more. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey!
I'm going to crank out 39 episodes, man. But I've got to. But there's some weird shit. I mean, we've found some fucking strange stuff lately that I've kind of like. Anyway, we'll talk about a bunch of that stuff when we're in person with each other.
Yeah.
Melody, I would love to talk to you sometime offline too.
Oh, sure. That would be great.
Deeply into this area, so
absolutely
good chats, so
yeah,
there's a bunch of weird stuff about ancient Welsh traditions, right? In this sort of region of the United States that I've been digging into, and like pockets pockets of old religions that came over, right? And these small enclaves that have carried on traditions a lot longer than they should have, that may have even blended with Christian, or actually Southern Baptist sort of ideals. And it's some like really strange stuff. And I honestly didn't think that it existed or that I believed in any of it. And then it's just the preponderance of evidence is like something strange is happening, right? And I don't even know if it exists now, but definitely the 50s and the 60s, there was some generational stuff that was still in existence. And I don't know. It's some strange stuff, but
yeah, it is. It's strangely wonderful, though. I mean, I think, I've lived all over the place, all over the country, overseas, and it was, I'm going to sound like a huge dork, but it was so cool to come back home to this part of the world. And I think unless you've been here and left it and then come back, then you get my jam on that, because it's kind of like, you think, oh, I'm going to go to the big city and I can't wait to get out of here. And then you miss it, whether you realize it subconsciously or, I still have yet to figure out what it is, but when you know it, and when you feel it, you feel it. And I literally just, when we came to Asheville, I had a moment. I mean, I was just like, wow. I mean, when I say it feels like home, it inherently feels like home, like many years, many generations home. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying there. Would definitely like to talk with you further and collaborate on something, because yeah, Penny. And by the way, Pennyroyal, awesome. I'm glad to hear there will be more of that.
Thank you.
Do you have roots in Western North Carolina, Melody?
I do. Through my father's family is Irish. His father was an immigrant to this country, and then his mother was Cherokee. So I have the Cherokee connection. And then through my mother, it's New Orleans Creole and Scottish from the Kentucky area. So, yeah, definitely. I feel I have a few little connections there.
I was in Asheville last weekend too.
Really? Yes.
Really was. Yeah.
It's a great town.
It's cool.
It's got its side. The breweries and everything are great, but we spend, like I said, we spend a lot of our time exploring, the mountains. And, my husband, he's very skeptical. He's very skeptical. He always looks at the science behind things. He's a musician. If he could see your studio right now, Nathan, he would probably, he'd be very upset that his is not built yet. But, even he has commented, we've been a couple of different places, and he said, okay, I feel the land spirits here. And so, Asheville's a great place. It's a great place to go to a brewery, but it's also a great area to really, if you are seeking and really are looking to find a connection or, learn something or just, get in touch with anything, I feel like you can do it here. And I don't know if it's because of all the like-minded people in one place, or like you said, is it something historically that's connected to the land that just inspires, that kind of connection?
Yeah, there is definitely something about it. I have my ancestors that are buried in Waynesville, Melody. So it's pretty close to where you're from. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. We explored Waynesville. It's a great part of the country. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. And Melody, where can people find you besides Strange Realities Conference?
Well, I've got the Pandora's Dark Carnival podcast. It's on hiatus, but I do have season 1 out there that can be found wherever you find your podcast. pandorasdarkcarnival.com, and I'm at SookieVamp on Twitter. So right now, that's about the best place to find me. Is I'm pretty active on Twitter. Try to keep it, targeted towards the strange and wonderful and paranormal. And yeah, give me a follow. I'll follow you back. And I'm looking to connect with like-minded people always. I'm kind of new to the the paranormal, conspiranormal community. So looking to make friends and see what's out there.
All right. And Nathan, where can people find you?
A Peter podcast. It's on Apple, all the platforms, and we got the Liminal Lodge, our Patreon that people can take a look at, where we're doing research on stuff. And we're on Twitter, Facebook, all the platforms, So anywhere where you look, you'll find us. So.
And they'll find you in Nashville in October.
Yes, and dude, I'm so stoked. I think this is gonna be fun. I can't wait to talk to you, Adam, too, in person, man. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna be fun. Saturday's gonna be crazy, guys.
Yeah. Y'all don't get too plastered before you get up there on stage. I do. Banal is gonna be there too. This might be.
I was going to say, what night are you guys having Tenny on? Because I'm sensing if we get these guys with Tenny, that's
Saturday he's night. A party animal too.
Saturday night. Yeah, it's gonna
be fun. Yeah,
it's gonna be a blast. And Mr. Gorightly, where can people find you?
Who wants to find me? Well, no, same thing. Twitter, kind of Facebook. I have adamgorightly.com. I have a bunch of blogs, Chasing UFOs blog and Untamed Dimensions blog. If you want to find my books, Amazon. I'm easy to find.
Yeah, I can highly recommend any of Adam's books. I've read a good portion of them at this point. The only one I haven't read is the Manson one, I think. I'll actually never forget the article that you did about the Bigfoot the Bigfoot hoax.
that was a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I had a fun name for that. I'm trying to forget what I named that.
I'll have to go look it up.
It was like Hunter S. Thompson meets Bigfoot. Yeah.
Okay, now you have my attention.
This was when those guys, Melody, you may remember 2008, the guys that hoaxed, they found Bigfoot in North Georgia.
Yes.
And it ended up being like a plastic costume.
Yeah.
And, Gorightly went to the press conference that they did. I guess they had it. I guess they were in California.
Nice.
They had it in Palo Alto, I think, which is near San Francisco. Yeah, it was a fiasco.
Was that Tom Biscardi? Was he there?
Tom Biscardi, yeah. It's like that. Las Vegas promoter, used car salesman. He got involved with those two jamokes from Georgia, and crazy.
This is different from the Texas one, though, right? This is not the one with the guys in Canada, right? Totally different one.
This was a big deal. Probably like at least 10 years ago. And one of the guys
2008 is when it happened.
Okay, and one of the guys was a cop of some stripe. He and his buddy were out in the woods. They saw a Bigfoot and shot it, I think. Then they said they had the body of Bigfoot, and they ended up bringing it. It was a big hype for this conference. We're going to see Bigfoot. They had the body. It was on ice, they preserved it, but there wasn't any body at the conference. And the guy showed these, had both of the two guys from Georgia talk, and then at the end they had these funky photographs they showed that were hoaxed photographs. Then later, I think they got one of the networks involved to go film, because they claimed they had this body, and it ended up being, they just got a bunch of entrails and stuff and stuck it in this. It was crazy.
There was a guy on Coast to Coast, came on Coast to Coast, and said something of like, "That's my suit. That's the suit that I designed." And I think it did end up being the suit that he designed, that they filled with guts.
Yeah, they put guts in it, and but they wouldn't let anybody really see it, or they let in one camera crew, and it was crazy. It was just BS, and got a tremendous amount of hype at this press conference. I went in there, the shucking and jiving, pretending to be a journalist, and got in, but CNN and I photographs, you look on my website, there was like all the networks were there. There was like a dozen cameras, press, people were taking this shit seriously, and it was all just a BS hoax. Trying to profit off of.
The one in Texas, I think you're referring to, Nathan. I think that might have been one of the same guys. Like, I think
Biscardi is in both of those cases.
Yeah, well, I think the guy that was the ex-cop.
Oh yeah, he did show up
Georgia.
Later, yeah,
he tried it again.
Yes,
and I think that's the Texas one.
But the Texas one, check it out. The Texas one was originally called the Kentucky Bigfoot Project, and they changed it to the Texas Bigfoot Project. But the farm where they had portals to go into Bigfoot world is in Kentucky, an hour and a half north of me, and they still own the property, right?
Okay.
And like all these people recanted the story, and there's all kinds of like legal, ethical problems of these scientists. One of the scientists still owns it, fled the state and moved to Pennsylvania, and but the Biscardi guy is involved in both of those cases.
One of the big things they were pushing angles was they had Bigfoot DNA.
Yeah.
Or it's DNA that didn't match human DNA. But how do you know what Bigfoot DNA is?
Yeah.
Somebody on Facebook commented, "Is that the one with Melba Ketchum?"
Yes.
I think that's the like. So dude, also was it part raccoon?
The Melba Ketchum stuff too. When you look at her closer, like, you know, obviously she was writing Bigfoot romance fiction also.
Oh dear.
Which is a weird twist to the case. But then if you look at her history, she like was involved in some like murder cases and some criminal cases where they had her as the DNA expert, and it was like totally messed up. And they end up turning her over to the Texas Forensics Board to have her disbarred. And
I think she was involved in the previous thing they did. I remember that name, Melba Ketchum. They were making a big thing about the DNA, and she worked in a lab somewhere. And I don't remember all the details now.
Sorted
just recently, a few months ago, there was a guy that said that he found a Bigfoot skull.
Yeah,
that might be it's something that was. I think that might be Canada, and that he found a Bigfoot skull, and it looks like a gorilla skull.
Right.
Yeah.
With a large gorilla skull. So, like, you know, who knows where he actually found it, but he said that he found it in the woods. He found it up there in Canada or somewhere.
The Kentucky case that had the sleeping Bigfoot, and remember the picture of the Bigfoot, it turns out it's a $700 Chewbacca costume that you could buy online, right? And it's like they show a picture of the picture beside the product, and it's like, that's it. And they're like, oh, there was this sleeping Bigfoot, and if you go to this property, there are portals on the property, and if you'll pay us $1,000, you can stay there. You know.
Oh, just 1,000.
Yeah, or whatever it was at the time. You know, they were trying. It was a Bigfoot habitat. You know.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the same. We're in the wrong business. We need to. We need to up our game, man.
We should start doing James Shelby Downard tours on buses and taking people across the country to occult sites and get really weird with it. You know?
That's an idea.
Yep. Money to be made. Money to be made.
Well, I want to thank you all for being a part of this tonight, and want to remind everybody that these three people will be part of the Strange Realities Conference 2022 coming up October 14th through the 16th. You guys get your tickets. We still have plenty of space for you at SIR Nashville. If you are in Nashville or somewhere in the environs, come see us. But you can also view this online as well. So coming up here in just a few more weeks, guys. Really looking forward to seeing you there.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, and want to thank everybody else for listening to Conspiranormal. And we'll be back next week with 4 more guest speakers from Strange Realities Conference.